Hello and welcome. We are in conversation today with Seema Mustafa, veteran journalist and editor of Covert magazine. And we are discussing what seems to be an undercovered subject in the Indian media, and that is the prospects of a third front government coming to power after the elections. So Seema, do you think there is a real possibility of a third front government?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's a very real possibility. It is showing itself on the ground. It is giving sleepless nights to the supposedly winning combinations of the NDA and the UPA, which barely exist on the ground. And it's a reality that is worrying the corporate class and many vested interests that have grown around the establishment.
In terms of the numbers, I think most predictions seem to suggest that of the three fronts, the third front is not likely to be the largest in terms of numbers. And yet you see the possibility of a third front government forming. Why is that?
Yes, because you see that all the regional parties, whether they were earlier in the NDA or the UPA, have more or less cut links with the parent BJP and the Congress. And all of them, even the ones who were with the UPA, even Nitish Kumar, who is with the NDA, have all spoken very highly of the left. And none of them have dismissed the possibility of a third front emerging after the elections as rubbish, as you know, the Congress and the BJP are doing.
Which would in any case depend on support from the Congress, if the numbers work out like that.
Yes. Now, that would be unfortunate, but it could be turned into fortunate if the third front government, if it does assume shape and form, goes ahead with rapid pro-people's policies and makes it very, very difficult for the Congress to withdraw support and go back to the people for a fresh mandate.
We've had non-Congress, non-BJP governments before, supported from outside or whatever. Do you think there's a greater prospect today of cohesion in terms of ideological or other positions in the third front?
This is the first time that a third front has emerged before the elections. It has never happened before. So that's one big positive. The other is that every time a third front option has sort of shown itself during the campaign and just after earlier, it has formed the government. It always represents that undercurrent of sentiment which is fed up of the mainstream parties, the two so-called mainstream parties, the BJP and the Congress, and it really needs to answer the aspirations of the people, of the marginalized sections who have probably been more marginalized under their rule.
Who do you see setting the agenda for this third front in terms of representing the aspirations of the people?
Well, I think no third front could have come together had it not been for the left. And it needs a nucleus. And the left has this time approached it, I would say, in a way more scientifically. It started throwing up the third front option a while ago. It started talking of programs and policies to attract regional partners who would coalesce with it on these issues. And it has managed to set up, before the elections, a 10-party coalition. That's phase one. And I think the second phase will be post-poll elections, where they will attract more regional partners, which is a major possibility right now. And they will use that to form a government with a certain clear program and a clear common manifesto.
The left has already spelt out at least some common features of what is likely to be an agenda. One is in terms of foreign policy, the independence of the foreign policy, and the other is a greater emphasis on a self-reliant economy rather than one banking on outside. But apart from these two, do you see any other issues emerging?
Yes, I think the federal structure,
Right.
the state-center relations will be very important.
Right.
And that will be something that the regional parties themselves will be very interested in determining. I think communalism will be a fourth issue, which will be extremely important, considering that in the last 10 years, all kinds of communal forces were fed. Terrorism was one, but in the wake of terrorism, it was used by the existing establishment and the government to convert it into communal hatred and divisiveness. Now, that is, interestingly, in this election, terrorism is not the real issue, as you can see from the very poor voter turnout in Bombay and in other parts of the country. But communalism remains a major issue.
In fact, in the few past examples we have had of non-Congress, non-BJP formations, while there has been a undercurrent, if you like, of the center-state relations being an issue, it has not really been foregrounded. Do you see that happening this time? And if it does, would that be a major departure in the Indian polity?
I think I see it happening. I think that the composition of the Third Front itself and the fact that the nucleus, if you call it the left, has already committed itself to that in its campaign before the elections, I think that is going to happen, and I think it will be a major departure.
It may also be perhaps more attractive as an agenda to some of the regional parties.
Absolutely.
Than other issues the left is interested in, like the US tilt to in foreign policy, etc.
Yes, absolutely. And interestingly, the US tilt towards foreign policy, all the partners in the Third Front right now took positions against it in Parliament. And many of those who are not in the Third Front right now have made it very clear that they are opposed to the nuclear deal. Again, to go back to Nitish Kumar, he said that we share that with the left. We were not for the nuclear deal. Now, that's interesting.
The media has not been particularly either receptive to this idea, or even in terms of their election analyses, particularly looking at the prospects in as, shall we say, positive a manner as you seem to be doing. Do you think the media also has a tilt against this possibility?
Oh yes, I think so. I think it is manifests itself by the fact that the media, instead of being really the fourth or fifth or whatever pillar you want to call it of a democracy, has become a vested interest. Because the control of the corporate classes and the business houses is so heavy on the media now, whether it be television or newspaper. It takes crores to really set one or the other up, that they have now started controlling the news completely. And for them, somehow the corporate believes, obviously, and for obvious reasons of economic policies pursued by the BJP and the Congress, that their interests are best protected by these two parties. So they're doing everything that they can to make sure that the Third Front option is not taken seriously on board. And now, because of the results that because of the campaign, they are being taken on board, then they're ridiculed.
Another angle which seems to have not received the attention it deserves in the media is a point that you raised about the low voter turnout in Mumbai, on which there was this big media hype about the middle class vote turning out and so on. But a neglected aspect has been the comparatively much larger turnouts in the left-dominated states, as well as in several of the states where the Third Front partners are the major.
And I think, when we analyze this at the end, when finally the results come out, we will see that wherever the BJP and the Congress are in direct conflict, and there is not a third party, the voter turnout has been much less and far more reduced than in states, like you just said, where the regional parties or the third alternative in some form or the other is present. Which means itself, if you actually read the writing on the wall, that there is a moving away, there is a lack of enthusiasm, there is a sense of despair, there is anger, there is frustration. And where people do not have a third party to direct their vote towards, they are preferring to stay at home.
So let me conclude by asking you that, contrary to the kind of news we see in the media and so on, which is looking at the possibility of a Third Front government with apprehension, you see this as a harbinger of change, of positive developments, of the polity taking on new directions?
I think it's a major opportunity. And I think it is yet again another opportunity that will be given by the people to the regional parties, to a third alternative, to bring into effect pro-people policies. And I think that those who have been experimenting and working on a third option for several decades now, there have been the United Front, National Front governments, which have worked but not worked that well, or have not been able to do as much as they wanted. If they've learned from all those mistakes, and I do think it can become it can really herald a new change.
Thank you, Seema.